Question 1D for Edexcel Islamic Studies paper. Question here is, assess the view that Muslims must follow the Sunnah to gain the approval of Allah. So understanding the question is asking whether the Muslims must follow the Sunnah to have the approval of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and go into Jannah. Okay. So this is question 12. In this question, the examiners are looking for your different points of views, the incorporation of this Quranic text that they've provided, and also giving your conclusion. Okay. The formula, different schools may use different formulas. The formula we use is Islamic. Okay. I for introduction, this is for agree, others disagree, new point, in religious texts, and conclusion. And this would hopefully, depending on the standard of writing, would get to level 3 or level 4 in the exam. So providing an example answer, short introduction. One key issue is whether following the Sunnah is necessary for Muslims to gain the approval of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can also add the definition of Sunnah here. Sunnah are the actions, words, and approval of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, that's the introduction done. S for agree. Many Muslims strongly believe that following the Sunnah is essential because it explains and demonstrates how to live according to the Quran. Okay, that's my point. In the paragraph, that's my point. For example, the Prophet is described in the Quran as the best example, which shows that his actions should be followed. Okay, that's my explanation. This suggests that Sunnah provides a practical model for Muslims, meaning that without it, they will struggle to fully implement the Quranic teachings such as prayer and charity. So my first paragraph is very clear, saying that Sunnah is very important. We have to follow it in order to gain approval of Allah, because Sunnah is the best example that we can follow. And without the Sunnah, we won't be able to fully implement the Quranic teachings. Now this last part here is called evaluation. Let's write it over here. This last part of the thing, paragraph, this part, that's called evaluation. Now that's a key skill that students need in order to get to level 4. What it means is to evaluate the paragraph, meaning to give your understanding or opinion or inference on that argument. So you are assessing this argument. So for example, let's go back to this and it says, describe the Quran as the best example which shows his action should be followed. What does this suggest? What does it mean to you? So it's not your opinion. You're not going to write, in my opinion, this means. You will start with this. This shows that Sunnah. So what are you taking away from there? That's what this part means, and that's what you need to do in order to get the top mark. So what do you take away from this argument? I take away from this argument that Sunnah provides a practical model for Muslims. And without the Sunnah, you can't implement the Quran teachings. Yeah, because this is from Islam. Yeah, this is, you're just taking these facts from the Quran and putting it in here. This next part is your own understanding on these arguments. And that's what the examiners are looking for in order to get the top marks. So that's S done. O, however, as others argue that Quran alone is sufficient for guidance as it is direct words of Allah. Okay, so this is a disagree paragraph. Okay, your alternative view. This is saying that no, Sunnah is not necessary, but the Quran is alone is necessary to gain the approval of Allah. Why? Because they may say the ultimate success comes from following the Quran rather than relying on the hadith, which were recorded later and may vary in authenticity. Yeah, so that's the point. Let's explain. Now we're evaluating. This weakens the argument because it highlights the concerns about the reliability and interpretation of some hadith. Meaning the argument that you mentioned here is getting weaker now. because some of the Sunnah may be weak, some may be fabricated, whereas the Quran is 100% true. So you also evaluate and say, look, yes, the Sunnah argument, though it suggests this, but I think it's weak because of the interpretation of some hadith can be weak. Okay. So that's all done. Next, after that is the new point. Yeah, that's a third point. Now, this is important in the exam, but if a person doesn't do it, they wouldn't be penalized because you're still looking for S and O. A further point is that following the Sunnah strengthens a Muslim's spiritual connection and allows them to actively follow the Prophet in his daily life. So now we're saying that yes, Sunnah is important to gain the approval of Allah because it allows you to follow the Prophet in your daily life. By following his character, behavior, manners such as kindness, honesty, patience, Muslims are not only fulfilling religious duties but also embodying Islamic values. So once again, point, explanation. Now, evaluation. This suggests that Sunnah goes beyond practice and plays a key role in developing moral character, which is essential in gaining Allah's pleasure and approval. Again, giving your own opinion, giving your own understanding on the argument. That's what evaluation is about, giving your own understanding on the argument. Now, so we've got the two sides of argument, but now the most important is incorporating this text inside your answer. If you don't incorporate this, then you'll be capped at 6 marks. So it's very important that it's incorporated. You don't have to make a special paragraph, it could be anywhere. I've made a special paragraph for this. In religious text, strong evidence supports the necessity of following the Sunnah alongside the Quran. Allah states in the Quran that it is not for a believing man or woman to have a choice when Allah and Messenger have decided a matter, which clearly emphasizes obedience to both Allah and the Prophet. In addition, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, whoever obeys me, obeys Allah. This suggests that following the Sunnah is directly linked to the obedience of Allah. Okay, so the two parts I've used over here is this part, when they have decided matter, and number 2 is whoever disobeys Allah and Messenger. I haven't used whole, but I've taken away from there and given the understanding. Okay, that's I done. And last one, in conclusion, although some may argue that the Quran alone is enough to gain Allah's approval, the stronger argument that Sunnah is essential in guiding Muslims. Therefore, Muslims must follow the Sunnah alongside the Quran to fully gain the approval of Allah. The Quran is going to be followed, but also the Sunnah must also be followed to gain the approval of Allah. And that was the last part, which is the conclusion.